Good day. My name is Eddie Buka Jr. and the assigned topic that I'm gonna discuss today is about Web Content Accessibility Guidelines from World Wide Web Consortium or W3C. I just want to point out Tim Berners-Lee, the creator of World Wide Web and the director of World Wide Web Consortium. He said that the power of the web is in its universality. Access by everyone, regardless of disability, is an essential aspect. The web is fundamentally designed to work for all people, whatever their hardware, the software, the language, location, or even ability. When the web meets this goal, it is accessible to people with a diverse range of hearing, movement, sight, and cognitive ability. If you're a designer, you need to know what web accessibility means. And me personally, I wasn't really aware about accessibility until when it started to really rise the importance and people started paying attention to it. Uh, Paying attention to it legislatively because like there was new laws and there has been people suing website owners for not being accessible, so we should really need to understand what it is. The core concept of WCAG is to bring not just people with good physique but allowing all people. All means whether your status, your age, your welfare, and physicality can jive into the web easily. So, what is WCAG? WCAG is Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is developed through the W3C process in cooperation with individuals and organizations around the world, with the goal of providing a single shared standard for web content accessibility that meets the needs of individuals, organizations, and governments internationally. Take some examples with people who cannot use their arms and uses a mouse stick to type. Another one, someone who cannot hear well and they use closed captions to watch videos. In fact, the Ofcom or the Office of Communications, the regulatory body for UK television broadcasting, conducted a study on how many people use subtitles and subtitle usage by people who are deaf or hard of hearing. This study found that 80%, as you see in the picture, 80% of people who use closed captions aren't deaf or hard of hearing, and only 20% of people with disabilities. So they are curious to learn more about who these people are and how, when, and why they use captions. Another one is someone who cannot see well and uses screen reader to read aloud. What is on the screen? And a screen reader is a generic term used for software that helps visually impaired people use a computer. As the name implies, screen readers read content on the computer screen and web browsers like text, images, and links, or content on the computer's operating system, such as the icons, the menus, the files, applications, and even folders. The software will then translate that content or data into a format that user is able to consume and interact with, such as audible speech and braille. So accessibility is very beneficial to all. For example, captions benefit everyone in a loud environment, and a good color contrast works better when there is glare. Also, people with age-related impairments such as reduced dexterity. So everyone has a better user experience with an improved layout and design. And a lot of accessibility can be built into the underlying code of websites and applications. There are two aspects in browsing the web. First is how the website looks, meaning they'll be able to see and read it properly. And how the website is developed, meaning they'll be able to use some one of the features like voice activation and etc. And as a designer who are basically managing the project, one of it is designing the visuals, but also a lot of times making sure that the development is good and accessible. Just a side note, there is an article that covers the core concept of accessibility in a really fun way. It is the guidelines to design a more accessible web by Pablo Stanley. So make sure to check the article. But this image is not Pablo Stanley. And he also said that designing for accessibility is not that hard to do. Some of the concepts and functions or keys in accessibility will be discussed here also. So now, moving on to the main topic, which is the basic guidelines for WCAG. Well, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, it's a group of people who decide that the web should be accessible, and there's actually some rankings like A, double A, and triple A, which means how good or how accessible your website is. The first guideline is the color contrast and text size. The idea here is some people are old or some have visual impairments, can't see as good as we are, and as a UI UX designer, we use color hierarchy and shadings to get satisfaction or to feel our websites are creative, but some people can't see the amazing display that we have, and that makes reading really a tough job for them. And the same thing goes for the text size. We designers make things fancy and leave a lot of white space by using tiny fonts, but we have to consider that a lot of people using this type of super small fonts make it hard to impossible to read. Just like in packaging designs, in medication, they are putting a tiny little paper, and there's actually laws that says the font size can't be lower than something because people need to be able to read it. And the same thing goes to website guidelines. Your font can't be below some combination of color and size to make sure that it will be seen. There are sites that check these samples of your fonts and color contrast, like this MDS contrast for Mac. Even in your Sketch or whatever design platform you have, and this will actually tell you while you are designing if you have enough contrast going on. And as you can see in the image, there is a rank which is triple triple A, meaning your color contrast is at best accessibility rate. Color contrast is an often overlooked web accessibility problem. People who have low vision could find it difficult to read text from a background color if it has low contrast. In a fact sheet on visual impair in a fact sheet on visual impairment and blindness, the World Health Organization, or WHO, estimates that there are 217 million who have moderate to severe vision impairment. So it is critical to consider the sufficient contrast between text and backgrounds. According to the W3C, the contrast ratio between text and its background should be at least 4.5 to 1. Conformance conformance level AA. The ratios become more forgiving with larger and heavier fonts since they are easier to read at lower contrast. If your type is at least 18 point or 14 point bold, the minimum contrast ratio drops to 3 to 1. Another tool so that we can check our color contrast is the in the web is the web aim that WCAG group recommended also, and it calculates the score for both regular and larger text sizes in different conformance levels, A, double A, or triple A. You can change the color values and see the results in real time. Do not use color alone to have differentiations, because some people are colorblind and they may they they may not see the difference. So let me give you an example. So let's say here, if you look at the right, we have two types of card. One of them is labeled with orange and one is red orange. But somebody has color blindness might not actually see they are different. And imagine that you're designing some task management and you want to show a status of a project, and if you are only relying on color, then somebody look at it, it might not it might not even see the difference. So make sure when we are designing, you add something else beside colors. Like here on the right, you may see here the I added team A and team B, and I also added some patterns in card 1 and card 2 to differentiate the two cards. Always remember that do not use color alone to make critical information understandable. When you're communicating something important, showing an action or prompting a response, don't use color as the only visual cue. People with low visual acuity or color blindness will have a hard time understanding your content. So try to use an indicator other than colors, such as text labels or patterns. When showing errors on the screen, don't rely on colored text alone. You may add an icon or include a little to the message. Consider adding also a visual cue such as font weight or underline text style to link text in a paragraph, so the links stand out. Next, a good trick is to print your graph in black and white and see if you can still understand everything in it. You can also use an app like Color Oracle, like in the picture, which shows you in real time what people with common color vision impairments see. These tips help you make sure that the information in your site is color agnostic. One more thing that you should care about is the focus state. Uh, we as a designer, we like to focus a lot on hover states, and You know what happens when people move and hover with the mouse over something that creates fancy interactions, right? But we a lot forget about the focus states. So, focus state basically is for people who use the keyboard to navigate website. So, they might click a tab and then the selected link somehow being selected, right, and we need to show how that looks like, because uh, some people use tabs to navigate to the web. And have you noticed the blue outlines that sometimes show up around links or in inputs or in buttons? These outlines are called focus indicators. Browsers by default use a CSS pseudo class to show these outlines on elements when they are selected. You might find these default focus indicators not very pretty, like the color blue link, and be tempted just to hide them. However, if you get rid of this default style, be sure to replace it with something else. Because according to W3C, focus indicator means any keyboard operable user interface has a mode of operation where the keyboard focus indicator is visible. Focus indicators help people know which element has the keyboard focus and help them understand where they are and when navigating your site. These are used by people who are blind and require screen readers, individuals with limited mobility, individuals who have suffered injuries like carpal tunnel, and power users who prefer this type of navigation. And some people use the keyboard as their primary way of navigating the web. Next is labels or form labels. Labels are trendy these days. A lot of people might see this kind of design on Facebook or in any social media app. When we are designing forms, it's very minimalistic. Like on the example, on the left, they are not even using a label for the form. And by label is what you see on the right. A text that is above the text field, and a lot of designer use this what we call placeholder or placeholder text. It is inside of the form, specifying what is the use of the form. The problem with this is some people use tools that read the website to them, and when there is no label, they're not gonna be able to know what the form is, and they won't be able to fill it up. Using placeholder text as labels are one of the biggest mistakes when designing a form, because people who use screen readers usually navigate through a form using the tab key to jump through the form controls. The label elements in the HTML are read for each form control. Any non-label text, just like a placeholder text, is usually skipped over by the screen reader. So it is better to use label ad- other than the placeholder or both. According to W3C, labeling controls providing labels to identify all form controls, including text fields, checkboxes, radio buttons, and drop-down menus. So, always help people understand what they should do and write in a form. It's best if labels don't go away even when the person is filling an input. People should never lose context with what they are writing. When designers hide descriptions or directions in their forms, they are sacrificing usability in favor of simplicity. Again, they are sacrificing usability in favor of simplicity. So make sure that we are using the labeling controls, not just a uh, placeholder. People with low vision often make use of screen readers to hear the web. These tools convert text to speech so that the person can hear the words on a site. There are two ways that you can present alternative text. First is within the alt attribute of the image element. Second is within context or surroundings of the image itself. So the next is alt tags for images. Try to describe what's happening in the image and how it matters to the story, rather than just saying something like picture, because we all know that context is everything. So alt tabs basically when you design some kind of a website and there's a code that says show this image. An alt tag is a piece of a code. As you can see in this example, here we have alt equals new Nike adapt BB. Alt means alternative, and if the image is purely decorative, or if it is if it creates redundancy because the surrounding context already explains the content, then adding an empty alt attribute will make screen readers skip it. If you don't write any alt text, some screen readers will read the file name to the individual. So that will be the worst experience you can provide. So make sure put an alt even it is redundant, because according to W3C, text alternatives act text alternative act as labels to identify audio, video, and files in other formats, as well as applications that are embedded as part of a website. The web must be accessible to provide equal access and equal opportunity to people with disabilities or diverse abilities. So, it's easy to tell where a photo has been taken, but training a computer to see a photo and describe the content seemed all but impossible until relatively recently. Google is working on an image captioning AI that can describe photos with 94% accuracy. Wow. And hopefully, we'll start seeing it to be used in different products. But in the meantime, we should manually provide text that describes the meaning and function of the images in our content. For Google to be able to look at a photo and tell that it shows a person on a beach flying a kite was unthinkable a decade ago. But that's what they achieve using this new framework and some good old human training, of course. By showing the AI pre-captioned images of a specific scene, Google was able to train the algorithm to properly caption similar but not identical scenes itself without any help or any human help. And all of this will lead on how the website will develop correctly. And it has something to do with how to set up the correct markup. It means that the code is written correctly so that they know what an article is, what a navigation is, the header and the footer, and all of this website will be navigatable with keyboard. And there is a catch, which is what we call the keyboard trap. And a keyboard traps occur when a keyboard user cannot move focus away from an interactive element. Traps can occur in input boxes, drop-down menus, or even on hyperlinks. This forces the keyboard user to be stuck inside the input box or forces them to activate a hyperlink without having the option to go past the link, which is a huge problem for those who use keyboards to navigate the web. If there is an element that does not allow the user to continue through the page, the user will not have the ability to access all of the information on the page. So a simple keyboard trap can ruin an entire page. And next, according to W3C about no keyboard trap, if uh, keyboard focus can be moved to a component of the page using a keyboard interface, then focus can be moved away from that component using only a keyboard interface. And it if it requires more than unmodified arrow or tab keys or other standard exit methods, the user is advised of the method for moving focus away. So, no keyboard trap is an optional conformance claim that follows regulatory standards to WCAG 2.0. No keyboard trap. So, keyboard accessibility is one of the most critical aspects of web accessibility. People with motor disabilities, blind people that rely on screen readers, people that don't have precise muscle control, and even power users are dependent on a keyboard to navigate content. They typically use the tab key on your keyboard to navigate through interactive elements on a web page, like links, buttons, or input fields. The focus state that I've discussed before provides a visual indicator of the component that is currently selected. As we navigate through a page, the order of the interactive elements is essential, and the navigation must be logical and intuitive. The tab order should follow the visual flow of the page, from left to right, then top to bottom. And it is the header, from header to the main navigation, then to the content, which is buttons and inputs, and finally the footer. A good practice is testing your site only using a keyboard. Use the tab key to move through different links and forms. Test using the enter key to select an element. And verify that all the interactive components are predictable and in order. If you can navigate through all your site without a mouse, you're in a good spot. Then now, there are four core principles in Web Content Accessibility Guidelines of W3C. And these four core principles in WCAG, which provides standards to help make the web accessible, which are internationally accredited and recognized by governments and businesses worldwide. So WCAG is also an ISO standard, or from the International Organization for standardization, which is the ISO IEC 40500. And when you say IEC, it means the International Electrotechnical Commission. And it is adapted in the European standard EN 301-549, which is the accessibility requirements for ICT products and services. So now it is built around four core principles. First, perceivable information and user interface. Text alternatives are equivalent for non-text content. Also, there is a captions and other alternatives for multimedia, and the content can be presented in different ways. For example, people can see the content, or they just hear it. Perceivable information and user interface. Next is the second one is operable user interface and navigation. So first is perceivable. Now the second is operable. So making sure that functionality is available from a keyboard only. Also, users have time to read and use the content of the website, making sure that content does not cause seizures and physical reactions. Users can easily navigate, find content, and determine where they are. Also, users can use different input modalities beyond keyboard, such as touch activation, voice recognition, or the speech input, and gestures to make content easier to use for many people. But yet, not everyone can use each of these input modalities and to the same degree. And for the example of operable or operability, people can use the computer by typing or by the voice. The third one is understandable information and user interface. First is perceivable, second, operable, and third, understandable. So the text is readable and understandable. The content appears and operates in predictable ways. Also, users are helped to avoid and correct mistakes. For example of this is you can get people to get clear and simple language. And the last is the fourth one is robust. Robust content and reliable interpretation. The content is compatible with the current and future user tools. For example, people can use different assistive technologies. So again, the four core principles of WCAG is perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Next, um, all requirements, or what we call the success criteria from 2.0, are included in 2.1. The 2.0 success criteria are exactly the same. The verbatim, word for word in 2.1. All requirements in 2.0 and 2.1 will be included in 2.2. The wording of the 2.0 and 2.1 success criteria will be exactly the same in 2.2. So these are the WCAG versions. WCAG 2.0 was published on 11 of December 2008, and WCAG 2.1 was published on the 5th of June 2018, and the WCAG 2.2 will be scheduled to be published in 2021. Content that conforms to WCAG 2.2 will also conform to the 2.1 and 2.0. So all of the content that conforms to the WCAG 2.2 will also conform to 2.1 and 2.0. So this often called backwards compatibility or backwards compatible. Backward compatibility, sometimes known as backwards compatibility, is a property of a system, product, or technology that allows for interoperability with an older legacy system or with input design for such as a system, especially in telecommunications and computing. So that is the backwards compatibility. Uh, who WCAG is for? First, it is for the web content developers, the page authors, site designers, etc. Another one is it is for web authoring tool developers. Then another one, it is also for web accessibility evaluation tool developers. And the last is it is for others who want or need a standard for web accessibility, including for mobile accessibility. So, uh, WCAG is uh, primarily intended for web content developers. You, yes, the page authors, site designers, etc. Uh, yeah, and related sources are intended to meet the needs of many different people, including the policymakers, managers, researchers, and others. So, yeah. Next is the understanding of the level of conformance or the A, double A, or triple A. That is what we call level of conformance. So, all success criteria must be important access issues for people with disabilities and that address problems uh, beyond the usability that might be faced by all users. So, in in other words, the access issue must cause a proportionately greater problem for people with disabilities than it causes people without disabilities in order to be considered an accessibility issue and covered under these accessibility guidelines. All success criteria must also be testable. This is important since otherwise it would not be possible to determine whether a page met or failed to meet the success criteria. Then the success criteria can be tested by a combination of machine and human evaluation as long as it is possible to determine whether a success criterion has been satisfied with a high level of confidence. So, the success criteria were assigned to one of the three levels of conformance. It's either A, double A, or triple A by the working group, the W3C working group, after taking into consideration a wide range of interacting issues. And in conclusion, basic guidelines are a great start. And if you want to do more to make your website more accessible, first, get an accessibility audit. Use an audit service to find out if your product works with assistive technologies and meets with the WCAG 2.0 level AA. And use the audit results to fix problems and do another test. Second, appoint an auditor. You can appoint someone in your company, if you have company, to do the recurrent accessibility audits. This could be someone in your quality assurance team. If well, you don't have someone with the experience, you can hire an external supplier. And the last, uh, make accessibility part of your design research. Then doing research, verify if your assumptions concerning accessibility were right, and if there are any potential opportunities to be improved. And recruiting people with disabilities requires a bit of more work. And so don't hesitate to contact associations and communities people are willing to help. So that's it. Thank you for listening.